The sea has always whispered, long before compasses pointed the way, long before maps drew the edges of continents. The ocean stretched in endless silence, carrying both fear and wonder in its depths. To stand on a shore at night, hearing the slow breath of waves, is to feel the weight of stories older than memory. Every culture that touched the sea has left behind its myths of gods who stirred the waters, of monsters that rose from the deep, of islands that appeared and vanished, of voices that sang from beneath the foam. These were not tales meant to frighten only, but to explain, to comfort, to remind people of their place before a force larger than themselves. Tonight, we wander into these calm depths together, not to chase storms, but to listen for the quiet echoes, the lapping of waves against wooden hulls, the hum of wind through sails, the slow rhythm of tides that rise and fall with the moon. This is a journey through the forgotten oceans, where myths drift like seaweed, soft and endless, waiting to be gathered. And if these gentle stories bring you peace, if they carry you toward rest as waves carry driftwood to shore, know that more voyages await. You can join us again simply by subscribing, not as an obligation, but as a calm harbor you may return to whenever you wish to sail into quiet history once more. Now, let us step onto a shore of the earliest myths, where the first sailors gazed across the horizon and wondered what lived in the silence beyond. The sea has carried us far. We began on ancient shores, where the first sailors gazed into the horizon with awe and fear. We met gods who stirred the waves, spirits who whispered in the tides, monsters who rose from the depths, and gentle companions who guided nets and canoes. We wandered through drowned cities and sacred islands, sang with sailors beneath the stars, and dreamed of oceans as paths into eternity. Now, as our voyage comes to rest, the sea remains before us, calm, endless, patient. Its myths are not gone. They drift with us still, like foam upon the tide, like songs woven into the wind. For every culture that has touched its shores, the ocean has been more than water. It has been teacher, guardian, threat, and mirror. It has given food, taken lives, and carried memory deeper than any trench. Pause here for a moment. Imagine yourself floating quietly on calm water at dusk. The horizon glows with the last light of day, and the stars slowly appear, one by one. The waves lap gently against your boat, steady and soothing. Beneath you, the ocean hums with all the myths it has ever carried, sirens and selkies, whales and serpents, islands that gleam, and cities that sink. They do not shout, they whisper, patient, waiting for those who choose to listen. As the night deepens, you feel yourself drifting, not away but inward, into the rhythm of the sea itself. The myths settle around you like a blanket, soft and endless. The ocean cradles you as it has cradled countless generations, its silence a lullaby that has outlasted empires, storms, and time itself. And so we part from these calm depths, though they will always remain with us. The ocean is eternal, and its stories will always rise again with the tide. If you have found rest here, if these waves of myth have carried you gently toward peace, know that more journeys await. You can return whenever you wish. The harbors of history are many, and the oceans of story are endless. Until then, may your nights be calm, your dreams steady as the tide, and your heart carried safely on the quiet waters of forgotten oceans. Long before ships bore sails of linen and prows carved with dragons or lions, humans stood at the edges of seas and rivers, staring out across waters that shimmered like glass or roared like thunder. To the first settlers, the sea was not only a body of water but a living being, endless, mysterious, and beyond comprehension. Its depths were invisible, its horizon unreachable, and yet it called to them, pulling their imaginations into the unknown. Picture a shoreline thousands of years ago. The sand is wet with tide, gulls will overhead, and waves lap steadily at the shore. A small group of people gather, their bodies wrapped in furs or woven grass, their eyes fixed on the shifting line where sea meets sky. They have no word yet for ocean as we use it. But they know its power. They see food within it, fish glinting beneath the surface, shellfish buried in the sand. They see danger in its storms, when winds tear waves into foaming walls. They see mystery in the way it swallows the sun each evening, only to return at each dawn. The first myths of the sea were born from these observations. When the water surged without warning, they imagined spirits stirring beneath it. When tides pulled away and returned with rhythm, they saw the breath of gods. When strange creatures washed ashore, the bones of whales, the shells of turtles, the glistening remains of squids, they became evidence of beings that lived unseen in the depths. The sea was both a giver and a taker, both cradle and grave, and so it was honored, feared, and told of in story. Some of the earliest sailors carved canoes from hollowed logs, pushing into rivers and bays, their paddles dipping silently into the water. With each stroke, they felt the ocean's patience and its warning. To survive, they learned its moods, the color of clouds before a storm, the flight of birds leading toward fish, the taste of salt in the air that told of shifting winds. Their knowledge was practical, but always wrapped in myth. If a journey succeeded, it was because the sea spirits had been kind. If it failed, it was because they had been displeased. At night, fires burned along shores, and stories were told. An elder would point toward the dark horizon and speak of a giant fish that swallowed the sun, releasing it only when fed with offerings. Another would describe a woman of the sea who wept when fishermen took too much, her tears becoming storms. Children listened wide-eyed, their dreams filling with waves and voices beneath the foam. In this way, myth and survival braided together as inseparable as tide and moon. Even now, when we stand on a beach and hear the waves, something of that early awe lingers. The sea feels alive, not empty, full of whispers just beyond our reach. We may know of currents, tides, and stars, but in our hearts, the old myths still stir. The first sailors left us no written records, but their wonder remains, carried forward in every culture that ever gazed into the horizon and asked, "Who lives beneath the waves?" Pause here and imagine yourself on such a shore. The fire flickers, the sea glimmers dark and endless, the voices around you fade into the rhythm of waves. You breathe deeply, as if inhaling the salt air, and let the silence of the ocean wrap around you. The myths are beginning, gentle as the tide. Long before the ocean became mapped and measured, before ships crossed continents with charts and compasses, the sea itself was worshipped as a living god. Its endless expanse, its sudden storms, its hidden depths, all were far too great for the human mind to treat as ordinary. To those who lived beside it, the sea was not merely water, but a divine presence, giver of life, taker of lives, a power to be feared, honored, and pleaded with. Imagine standing on the edge of the ancient Mediterranean thousands of years ago. The waves roll gently under the rising sun, and the horizon glows like molten gold. Fishermen kneel before setting out, sprinkling grain or pouring wine into the surf. They whisper prayers, not only to secure their catch, but to ask permission to cross the waters safely. Every ripple is a response, every gust of wind a sign. The sea listens, and in its silence people hear judgment. Among the Greeks, the ocean took the form of Poseidon, a god who carried a trident and ruled the waves. Sailors feared his temper, for he could calm the waters or hurl them into chaos with a strike of his staff. In his domain lived Nereids, gentle sea nymphs who offered protection, and monstrous beings that could wreck ships. To the Greeks, the sea was a kingdom full of life and order, ruled by a god whose moods shaped the fate of sailors. Further east, in Mesopotamia, waters were even older than the gods themselves. The primordial ocean, called Tiamat, was the very beginning of creation. From her endless chaos the world was born, and yet her wrath remained, a reminder that beneath order lay the eternal depths. For these early peoples, the sea was not simply an element of nature. It was the womb of existence itself. Travel south to Egypt, and the Nile was the heart of life. But beyond its delta lay the Mediterranean, mysterious and vast. To cross, it was to risk leaving the ordered world of the pharaohs, and enter the unknown, where gods of foreign shores held sway. The sea was boundary as well as God, a liminal space between life and death. Order and chaos, known and unknown. In the Pacific, for Polynesian voyagers, the sea was both pathway and parent. They spoke of Tangaroa, god of the ocean, who was at once creator and destroyer. To sail upon his waters was to move through the body of a god, guided by stars, winds, and the whispers of ancestors. Every successful voyage was a conversation. With Tangaroa, every failure a reminder of his strength. What unites these early beliefs is the same reverence. The sea was never seen as empty or lifeless. It was a personality, a will, a being whose moods determined survival. Offerings of food, drink, song, and sacrifice were ways of speaking to it, of maintaining balance between human need and divine presence. To ignore the sea was unthinkable. To respect it was essential. Pause here for a moment. Picture yourself at an ancient shore, holding a small offering in your hand. Perhaps it is a handful of grain, perhaps a carved shell, perhaps simply your whispered words. You step forward, the waves touching your feet, and release your gift into the water. The tide carries it away, and you feel a strange peace, as though the sea has heard you, as though you are no longer a stranger upon its edge, but part of its story. The sea as God reminds us that awe is a form of knowledge. Long before science explained currents and storms, reverence gave people the strength to face the waves. In myth, the ocean was not conquered, it was honored, and in that honor lay survival. For the Greeks, the sea was never a silent backdrop. It was a world alive with gods, spirits, and creatures whose powers reached into every voyage. To step into a boat was to step into Poseidon's domain, a realm of beauty and danger, generosity and wrath. His trident stirred the waters, his temper rumbled in storms, and his favor or disfavor could mean the difference between safe arrival and ruin in the waves. Imagine a harbor on the Aegean coast, its waters shimmering in the morning light. Fishermen prepare their nets, merchants load amphorae of oil and wine, and sailors tighten the ropes of their ships. But before departure, prayers are offered, small sacrifices, a libation of wine. A wreath cast into the sea are made to Poseidon, lord of the deep, for his domain is vast, not just the surface waters but the unseen depths, home to spirits, nymphs, and monsters alike. Poseidon himself was both feared and respected. In myths, he could be vengeful, unleashing storms upon Odysseus for daring to blind his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Yet he could also be protective, guiding sailors who honored him, granting safe passage across treacherous waters. His trident symbolized not only destruction, but also the power to calm, to restore stillness when waves threatened to swallow ships whole. Alongside him lived the Nereids, sea nymphs who embodied the gentler face of the ocean. 50 daughters of Nereus, they swam through the waves, their hair flowing like seaweed, their songs carrying comfort to sailors in peril. Some Nereids became guides in myths, rescuing heroes, calming storms, and offering wisdom. To see them was to glimpse the kindness of the sea, its ability to cradle as well as to crush. But not all beings of the Greek sea were gentle. The depths teemed with monsters, born from chaos, embodying the fears of sailors who knew how quickly the ocean could turn. Scylla, with her snapping heads, and Charybdis, the whirlpool that swallowed entire ships, reminded sailors of the thin line between safe passage and doom. Even the sirens, with their sweet voices drifting across calm waters, lured men to destruction. For the Greeks, the sea was not one thing, it was balance, beauty and terror interwoven like waves and foam. Pause here and picture a lone ship sailing across the Aegean. Its wooden hull creaks. Its sails swell gently in the wind. The crew, move steadily, their eyes scanning the horizon. Beneath the calm surface, they imagined Poseidon watching, trident in hand, deciding whether to favor them. Perhaps a Nereid swims just out of sight, her voice carrying softly with the wind, promising safety, or perhaps, in the darker waters, something stirs, waiting for the right moment to rise. The sailors whisper prayers, not loudly, but with quiet devotion, trusting that the sea will hear. Greek myths remind us that the ocean was always more than waves. It was a mirror of human experience, love and rage, comfort and fear, life and death. By shaping the sea into gods and spirits, the Greeks gave voice to the awe they felt standing at its edge. Even now, when we think of the ocean, echoes of Poseidon's trident, the songs of Nereids, and the shadows of sea monsters drift quietly through our imagination. Far to the north, where the sea is dark and restless, where fjords cut deep into the land and waves crash against cliffs of stone, the Norse people shaped their own myths of the ocean. To them, the sea was not gentle. It was cold, vast, and filled with powers that could not be tamed. In this harsh landscape, sailors carved dragon-headed ships, set their sails against the icy winds, and entrusted their lives to gods who could turn storms loose. With a thought at the heart of these legends lies Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Born of the trickster Loki, Jormungandr was cast into the sea by Odin, where it grew so vast that it encircled the entire world, biting its own tail. To the Norse, this was no ordinary monster but the embodiment of the ocean itself, endless, circling, enclosing all lands. Every wave that struck the shore, every storm that rose suddenly, could be imagined as the serpent shifting in its sleep beneath the water. Sailors venturing into the North Sea or across the open Atlantic felt the serpent's presence. The vast horizon, unbroken and cold, seemed alive, as though something immense lay just below the surface, watching. The serpent was not only danger, it was balance, for only when Jormungandr released its tail, the myth said, would the world end, drowning in the sea's final flood. Until then, the serpent's patient coil was what held the world together. Other beings filled Norse seas as well. The 9 daughters of Aegir and Ran, goddesses of the waves, each embodied a mood of the ocean, calm, cruel, playful, or vengeful. Ran herself carried a net, dragging drowned sailors into her hull beneath the waters. For those who died at sea, it was said their spirits passed into her realm, carried by waves as offerings. To the Norse, drowning was not only tragedy but also entry into another domain, the sea claiming back what had always been hers. Imagine a longship cutting through icy waters. The air is sharp with salt and cold, the sail bellies with wind, and the horizon is pale and endless. The crew rows steadily, their voices low, their eyes alert. Beneath them, they know Jormungandr stirs, its body coiled in the darkness. A sudden swell lifts the ship, and for a moment they imagine the serpent rising, testing them, reminding them of its patience and its power. They whisper to Aegir for calm seas, to Ran for mercy, offering coins or rings to the waves so that she may spare them. The Norse did not see the sea as an enemy to be conquered. They saw it as inevitable, eternal, a force beyond their control. To sail it was to show courage, to accept risk, to acknowledge that human life is always fragile against the vastness of nature. In their myths, the ocean became both womb and grave, serpent and goddess, path and end. Pause here and feel the cold breath of northern seas. The ship rocks gently, the waves hiss against its hull, the stars above gleam like frost. Beneath the silence, the sea hums with hidden life, a serpent coiled around the world, patient and immense. The Norse knew this silence, and in their myth, they gave it a voice that still echoes across the dark waters. Far from the icy waters of the north, across the vast Pacific, another tradition of sea myth and memory grew, one that saw the ocean not as a serpent to fear, but as a pathway of life. For the Polynesian peoples, scattered across islands separated by hundreds of kilometers, the sea was both highway and home. a bridge between worlds. Their myths and practices turned the ocean from an obstacle into a living map filled with voices, ancestors, and gods. Imagine a starlit night on a Polynesian island. The air is warm. The sea glows faintly with phosphorescence, and the rhythmic crash of waves on the reef seems to beat like a drum. On the beach rests a great double-hulled canoe, its sails woven from palm fibers, its ropes twisted from coconut husks. Families gather, bringing food, water, and offerings. Priests chant to the gods of the sea and sky. Then, as the tide rises, the canoe is pushed into the surf, and the journey begins, not blindly, but with confidence, guided by stars, swells, and silence. At the center of these beliefs stood Tangerol, god of the sea, who embodied both its generosity and its danger. Fishermen prayed to Tangerol before casting their nets. Sailors honored him before leaving sight of land. The sea was his body, the waves his breath, the fish his gifts. To sail was to move across his domain, and respect was essential, for he could calm the waves or raise storms without warning. Yet the ocean was not only Tangerol's, it was also filled with the presence of ancestors. Polynesian voyagers believed that those who had gone before still guided them, in the flight of birds, in the glow of clouds that reflected unseen islands, in the shape of waves that whispered of land. Navigation was not merely science, was communion. Every star overhead was both compass and story, carrying the memory of countless journeys. The canoes themselves were more than vessels. They were sacred spaces, floating villages that carried not only people but culture, songs, tools, plants, and animals that would take root on new islands. A voyage was an act of creation, extending life across the ocean's emptiness. Myths told of great navigators who could read the sea as others read books, sensing shifts in currents, listening to the hum of water against the hull, knowing by instinct and training where the path lay. Pause here and picture such a voyage. The night is calm, the canoe glides silently across swells that roll endlessly. The stars blaze above, brighter than any lamp, arranged in constellations that guide direction. The crew rests in turns, their faces lifted to the sky, their voices humming songs that keep time with the paddles around them. The ocean is vast and dark, yet not empty. It is alive, full of presence, carrying them forward like a mother carrying her children. In Polynesian myth, the ocean was not a barrier but a connection. It joined islands like beads on a necklace, tied people together across distances so great that to others they seemed impossible. The gods of the sea, the guidance of ancestors, the patience of stars, all wove into a worldview where the ocean was both challenge and comfort. Even today, when modern vessels cross the Pacific with engines and GPS, Polynesian navigators still practice the old ways, reading stars, waves, and birds. Their canoes glide across the same waters, honoring Tangerol, guided by the same sky. The myth and the practice remain inseparable, reminders that the sea can be a teacher, a pathway, and a god all at once. Across the eastern horizon, where the Pacific waves meet the shores of Japan, the sea was never just a backdrop. It was alive with dragon spirits and deities who guarded, blessed, or punished those who ventured into its depths. For the island peoples of Japan, the ocean was both protector and destroyer, boundary and pathway, a realm filled with beings whose presence could be felt in every tide and storm. At the heart of these beliefs was Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea. He dwelled in a palace beneath the waves, known as Raigje, a shimmering hall of coral and pearl where time itself moved differently. To fishermen and sailors, Ryujin was a powerful ruler who controlled the tides through magical jewels. To please him was to find calm waters and abundant fish. To anger him was to face storms and loss. Legends tell of heroes who visited his undersea palace, returning with treasures or wisdom, forever marked by the stillness of his domain. Alongside the dragon god were countless spirits, some benevolent, others dangerous. The Yumibuzu, for example, was said to appear suddenly on calm seas, a dark, towering figure rising from the waves. Sailors feared its presence, for it could capsize ships with a single gesture, demanding respect or offerings. To see the shadow of an Yumibuzu in the mist was to feel the thin line between safety and disaster. But the sea also held nurturing figures. The Betin, goddess of music, beauty, and all things flowing, was honored as a protector of seafarers. Her shrines stood on cliffs and islands, where fishermen prayed before casting their nets. In her presence, the sea became a source of song and harmony, not only danger. One of the most enduring figures of Japanese sea myth is the Yuma no Kami, the general sea deity, who received offerings of rice sake and prayers at harbors and shorelines. Before departing, sailors bowed to the waters, acknowledging that they were stepping into a sacred realm. Festivals still carry echoes of these rituals, with processions of boats adorned with flags, music, and offerings, honoring the gods of the sea. Pause for a moment and picture a fishing village along the coast of Japan at dawn. Wooden boats are lined along the shore, their prows painted with protective symbols. Fishermen kneel beside them, pouring sake into the surf, their voices rising in prayer. Above, gulls wheel and call. The horizon glows faintly with the rising sun, and the sea, calm for now, seems to listen. The dragon god stirs in his coral palace, the waves ripple softly, and the day's work begins beneath the gaze of unseen powers. Japanese sea myths remind us that the ocean is never one thing alone. It can be dragon and goddess, terror and comfort, shadow and song. In honoring these beings, the people of Japan acknowledged both the beauty and danger of the waters that sustained them. And even today, in coastal shrines and festivals, in stories told at night when the waves crash against the shore, the echoes of those myths remain. When sailors of the ancient Mediterranean set out upon long voyages, they knew to fear not only storms and hidden reef, but also voices that drifted across the water, soft and beautiful, promising comfort in the loneliness of the sea. These were the sirens, creatures whose songs could calm the heart, blur the mind, and lure ships into ruin. Their danger was not the crashing of waves, but the sweetness of melody carried on the wind. In early Greek myth, sirens were not the mermaids of later tales, but half-bird, half-woman beings perched on rocky islands. Their feathers shimmered, their faces were radiant, and their voices rose in harmonies that reached far across the sea. To hear them was to forget everything else. The creak of the ship, the labor of oars, even the memory of home. Their song was irresistible, and many a vessel, enchanted, steered too close to their shores, only to be shattered against the rocks. Perhaps the most famous tale of the sirens comes from Homer's Odyssey. On his long journey home, Odysseus was warned of the danger of their voices. Clever and cautious, he stopped his crew's ears with wax, making them deaf to the call. But he himself, curious to hear the forbidden music, was tied to the mast. As the ship drifted past, he strained against the ropes, begging to be released, his heart filled with longing. Yet bound fast, he survived, hearing their song but passing safely beyond it. Later stories softened the sirens, blending them with sea spirits and mermaids. Instead of bird women, they became figures with flowing hair and shimmering tails, sitting upon rocks, combing the waves with their fingers, their voices still dangerous but tinged with sorrow. In these tales, they sang not only to destroy but, out of loneliness, longing for company in the endless sea. Their song was as much a cry of despair as a lure. Imagine a quiet night at sea. The water is calm, the stars shimmer above, and the only sound is the soft dip of oars. Then, faintly, a melody rises, low, sweet, carrying across the water. It seems to come from nowhere and everywhere, slipping through the night air. The crew stiffens, eyes wide, their hands pausing mid-stroke. The music promises rest, promises warmth, promises the end of fear. And yet, beneath the sweetness lies danger, a pull toward unseen rocks. The sailors whisper prayers, tightening their grip on the oars, resisting the call. The myth of the sirens speaks to something deeply human. The way beauty can distract, the way desire can lead us astray, the way comfort can sometimes conceal peril. Yet it also speaks of the sea's loneliness, its endless horizon that makes any voice, even a dangerous one, sound like salvation. Pause here and picture yourself on a rocky island where waves crash gently against the shore. The wind carries a song, not loud but soft, tender, almost like a lullaby. You know it could lead to ruin, but you cannot deny its beauty. You sit quietly, listening, letting the melody wash over you. As timeless as the sea itself. Far to the north, in the cold waters around Norway and Iceland, sailors told of a creature so vast that it seemed more like an island than a beast. They called it the kraken, a silent terror that dwelled in the deep, stirring only when ships drifted too close. Its body was said to stretch for miles, its tentacles curling upward like the masts of dozens of ships, its presence hidden beneath the waves until it chose to rise. Imagine a quiet morning at sea. The water is calm, the sky pale with northern light, and the ship drifts slowly, its crew easing into their tasks. Fish are caught in abundance, more than usual, more than expected. Sailors rejoice, filling their nets until they nearly burst. But then a hush falls, for they know the tale, where fish gather in great numbers. The kraken is near, its massive body drawing schools of fish around it. The sea itself seems too full, too alive. Eyes scan the water nervously, waiting for the moment when calm might turn to catastrophe. The kraken, in legend, did not always attack with frenzy. Its danger was in its vastness, in the way its slow rising could overturn ships without malice, simply by displacing the sea. Some said it could create whirlpools with its movement, pulling vessels into its maw. Others believed its tentacles could drag men and ships beneath the surface, never to be seen again. But always, its terror was amplified by silence, for sailors could not see it, only sense it, the uncanny stillness of water, the sudden abundance of fish, the shadow shifting below. That in truth, these legends may have been born from encounters with giant squids, creatures of the deep rarely glimpsed but sometimes washed ashore, their tentacles longer than a man. For sailors of earlier centuries, to see such a being, or even to imagine its full size beneath unseen waters, was to confront the mystery of the ocean itself, vast, alien, and unknowable. Pause here and picture a northern sea, mist curling low across the waves. The ship rests quietly, its nets heavy with fish, the crew uneasy. Beneath them, a shadow stirs, vast, patient, moving slowly through the depths. The water swells, the ship rocks, and for a moment it feels as though the entire sea is rising. Yet nothing breaks the surface. The men whisper, fearful, casting aside their nets, hoping the ocean will swallow only the fish and not themselves. The kraken myth is less about monsters and more about awe, the human recognition that beneath the surface lies a world too large, too powerful, too silent to control. It is the embodiment of the unknown, a reminder that the sea hides more than it reveals, and in that hidden vastness, the mind fills with creatures as immense as imagination itself. Along the misty coasts of Scotland, Ireland, and the Orkney Islands, the sea was never only waves and salt, it was a threshold, a place where humans and otherworldly beings might meet, where stories slept ashore like the tide. Among the most beloved of these tales are those of the Selkies, sea folk who lived in the cold waters, but could shed their skins and walk upon land as humans. Picture a rocky shore at twilight. The waves roll gently, seals bob in the surf, their dark eyes glimmering with intelligence. As the moon rises, one seal swims closer, crawls upon the sand, and shakes off its glistening coat. In that moment, it transforms, no longer a seal, but a woman of striking beauty, her hair wet with seawater, her skin glowing in the pale light. She lays aside her sealskin, dances barefoot on the stones, and joins the world of humans until The tide calls her back. The Selkie stories are filled with tenderness and longing. Sometimes, a fisherman finds a Selkie's skin hidden on the shore and, captivated by her beauty, keeps it. Without her skin, she cannot return to the sea, and so she becomes his wife, living among humans, raising children, weaving herself into the rhythms of village life. And yet, her eyes always wander to the waves, her heart pulled by the sound of the surf. One day, if she finds her skin again, she will slip back into the water, returning to her first home, leaving behind sorrow but also love. In other tales, Selkies appear as men handsome, mysterious, arriving from the sea to woo those on land. Their presence carries both comfort and danger, for they belong to two worlds and are bound to return to the waves. The ocean is always their true home, and their time on land is fleeting, like foam upon the tide. These myths reflect the intimacy coastal peoples felt with the sea. Seals were constant companions, seen daily on rocks and in waves, their human-like eyes sparking imagination. To live beside them was to blur the line between human and ocean, to imagine kinship across that boundary. The Selkie, half seal and half human, embodied the longing of shore dwellers who loved the sea yet feared its pull, the dream of belonging to both land and water at once. Pause here and imagine sitting on a cliffside above the Atlantic. Below, seals bark and play, their sleek bodies glistening. For a moment, you wonder which of them are truly Selkies, waiting for night to slip ashore. The sea glows silver under the moon, and the air is filled with its hush. You close your eyes, and in the rhythm of waves you almost hear footsteps on the stones, soft laughter carried with the wind, and the promise of a story too tender to be fully told. The Selkie myths remind us that the sea is not only vast and terrifying, but also intimate, filled with love, loss, and longing. In their embrace, we find the deep human desire to bridge worlds, to belong both to land and to the calm depths of forgotten oceans. If there is one group who has always listened most closely to the sea, it is the fishermen. For them, the ocean was not distant or abstract, but a daily companion, generous some days, silent or cruel on others. Their lives depended not on empires or great ships, but on the quiet rhythm of tides, the pull of nets, and the favor of unseen spirits. And so, around the world, countless fishermen's myths grew. Small stories woven into the salt and spray of everyday survival. Picture a small harbor at dawn. The boats are modest, carved of wood, their oars stacked neatly, their nets coiled like sleeping snakes. Fishermen step carefully into the water, their feet numb with cold, and push the boats into the surf. The horizon is pale, the sea quiet, but everyone knows that what happens in the hours ahead depends on forces they cannot see. Before casting their nets, many offer a prayer. Sometimes a handful of grain, sometimes a sip of wine or ale poured into the water, sometimes a whispered word to the tide itself. In Greece, fishermen told stories of dolphins guiding them to schools of fish, or of nereids who blessed their nets when treated with respect. In Japan, tales spread of fishermen who pulled up not fish but treasures, a jeweled crown, a golden hook, or even a glimpse of Ryujin's shimmering palace beneath the waves. In the Celtic Isles, fishermen feared catching a Selkie by mistake, for to trap such a being in their nets would bring storms and sorrow upon the village. Luck was as important as skill, and so rituals developed to invite it. Some would never whistle on a boat, fearing it would call up winds too strong. Others avoided naming certain animals, believing their mention would bring bad luck. A tangled net might be untangled not only with hands but with quiet words, soft prayers whispered, as though the knots themselves were listening. And then there were stories of fishermen who pulled up more than they'd bargained for, and that might snare a small spirit of the sea struggling and shimmering. The fisherman who freed it gently, returning it to the waves, would be rewarded with abundant catches thereafter. But the one who kept it, or mocked it, would find his nets empty, his boat overturned, his family cursed with hunger. These stories were not just warnings, they were lessons in respect, teaching that the sea gives only to those who give back. Pause here and imagine a fisherman in the stillness of night. Alone in his boat, the stars glow above, the water reflects their light, and the only sound is the drip of oars and the sigh of waves. He casts his net, then waits, listening. In that silence, the sea seems to speak, not in words, but in creaks of wood. In the tug of the net, in the pull of tide, he feels both fear and comfort, knowing his life rests in the hands of a power far older than himself. The myths of fishermen remind us that the ocean's relationship with humanity was never only about conquest or exploration. It was about daily life, about survival measured in meals and storms. In their small boats, these men and women created a dialogue with the sea, one that mixed practicality with reverence, luck with ritual, silence with whispered stories. And in that dialogue, the sea was never just water. It was a living partner, patient and unpredictable, always listening, always present. For as long as people have watched the horizon, the sea has been seen not only as a source of life but also as a passage beyond it, its vastness, its ceaseless tides, its horizon where earth seems to dissolve into sky. All spoke of journeys into another realm. Across cultures, the sea became more than water. It became a path to the afterlife, a threshold between the living and the dead, carrying souls across its waves into silence. In ancient Egypt, the Nile was not only a river of harvest but a mirror of eternity. The dead were imagined to sail upon its waters, guided by the sun god Ra, who himself traveled each night through the underworld upon a divine boat. To die was to join this endless voyage, carried across cosmic waters, defended from monsters, and reborn with the dawn. Funerary texts spoke of ferrymen who awaited souls, ready to take them across channels that divided worlds. For Egyptians, water was not an ending but a passage, a journey through darkness into light. In Greece, too, death was imagined as a crossing. Souls traveled to the underworld along the river Styx, ferried by Charon in his small boat. For this reason, the dead were buried with coins placed upon their eyes or tongues, payment for the ferryman. Without it, they would wander the shores forever, unable to cross. The river's black waters, flowing endlessly, mirrored the seas. Greek sailors knew so well, vast, uncertain, and full of hidden dangers. To the Greeks, death was not simply a doorway. It was a voyage that required preparation and respect. The Norse, with their cold northern seas, imagined death also as a journey over water. Warriors who fell in battle were sometimes buried in ships, their bodies laid upon wooden decks, with weapons and treasures, the vessel itself set aflame or buried beneath earth. In this way, the ship carried them into the next world, across cosmic seas, toward Valhalla or other halls of the dead. The ocean, which had shaped their lives as path and boundary, became also the road upon which their souls departed. Pause here and picture these crossings. A boat gliding silently through darkness, the stars reflecting in black water, a ferryman's oar dipping into the Styx, the silence broken only by the drip of water. Riz golden bark shining faintly as it moves through shadow, its crew fending off serpents of chaos, a Viking ship burning against the horizon, its flames mirrored in the sea, carrying a warrior into the night. In each vision, the sea is more than waves, it is eternity itself, carrying souls beyond the edge of the world. These myths remind us that water was never just for life, it was also for death, for transition, for mystery. To sail into the afterlife was to continue the dialogue between human and ocean, to accept that just as rivers lead to the sea, so too does life lead to something greater. In the calm depths of forgotten oceans, the line between life and death blurs, and the sea becomes both cradle and resting place, both beginning and end. Beneath the rolling waves, in the vast quiet of the sea, there are creatures so large they seem almost like pieces of the ocean itself. The whale, calm giant of the deep, has inspired myths across cultures. Its size, its silence, and its sudden appearance up the surface filled sailors with awe. Was it a monster, a god, a drifting island? To those who glimpsed its back arching above the waves, it seemed both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of the ocean's hidden enormity. In Norse tales, the whale was sometimes mistaken for land. Sailors would anchor their ships upon its broad back, light fires to cook their food, and rest only for the creature to sink suddenly, dragging them into the depths. This was the Hafjufal, a great sea monster said to rise from the deep, opening its massive mouth to swallow fish, birds, and even ships whole. Whether whale, kraken, or something stranger, the tale captured the uneasy truth that what looked safe upon the sea might be alive, and that the deep was never still. In the Bible, the story of Jonah and the whale carried a quieter lesson. Swallowed by the creature after fleeing his divine duty, Jonah lived within its belly for 3 days and nights. In the silence of that living cavern, he prayed, reflected, and was reborn into obedience. The whale here was not only terror but also sanctuary, a place of trial and transformation, a reminder that even the darkest depths might cradle life. Among Inuit peoples, the whale was sacred, a provider of food, oil, and bone essential for survival in harsh Arctic lands. Yet hunting it was never only practical, it was also spiritual. Rituals honored the whale's spirit, songs were sung, and taboos respected. The whale was a gift of the sea, and to fail in respect was to risk anger. The ocean itself, the calm giant, once slain, was treated with reverence, its spirit sent back to the waters with offerings so that it might return again. In the Pacific Islands, whales appeared in chants and stories as messengers of the gods, guardians of voyagers, or transformed ancestors. To see one near a canoe was to feel protected, guided by a being older and wiser than humankind. Their immense bodies moved with such grace that they became symbols of balance, proof that even the largest of creatures could live in harmony with the endless sea. Pause here and imagine drifting on a small boat, the water still, the horizon unbroken. Suddenly, the sea stirs and a vast shadow moves beneath you. A back arcs above the surface, glistening with spray, and a column of breath rises into the sky with a deep, resonant sound. For a moment, the world feels both fragile, immense. The whale does not harm, does not chase, but simply exists, calm, patient, enduring. And then it slips back into the depths, leaving only ripples as evidence of its passing. The whale in myth reflects the human longing to understand the unknown. It is both monster and savior, threat and protector, an embodiment of the ocean's contradictions, gentle yet immense, silent yet powerful. It drifts through stories as it drifts through the sea, unhurried, eternal, carrying the weight of oceans upon its back. For all its calm beauty, the sea is never predictable. One moment its surface lies flat as glass, reflecting stars like a mirror, and the next it rises in walls of water, tearing sails and breaking ships apart. To ancient sailors, storms were not just weather, they were voices of the gods, sudden outbursts from divine beings who ruled the waves. When the sea spoke loudly, people listened, for their lives depended on it. In Greek myth, Poseidon's anger was often expressed in storms. When Odysseus dared to defy him, the sea god hurled winds and waves against his fragile boat, scattering him across the Mediterranean. Sailors believed that angering Poseidon by failing to make an offering, by boasting of their skill, or by harming a sacred creature like a dolphin, could bring sudden gales, as if the god himself struck the sea with his trident. In the Norse world, storms belonged to Aegir and Ran, the husband and wife who ruled the sea. When Aegir was pleased, he gave sailors calm waters and abundant fish, but when angered, he brewed storms in a cauldron, waves rising like mountains, thunder rolling across the sky. Ran, with her dreaded net, gathered the drowned into her hull beneath the waves. For Norse sailors, to feel a storm building was to Sense these deities stirring, their moods spilling into the ocean. Across the Pacific Islands, storms were seen as the breath of Tangaroa, the great sea god. Polynesian navigators knew that respect was vital. Before a voyage, they made offerings and sang chants to calm the waters. Yet when the skies darkened and winds screamed, they believed Tangaroa was speaking, reminding them of his power. Storm was not simply an obstacle but a message urging humility and reverence. Even in Christian traditions, storms carried divine weight. Sailors prayed to saints for protection, believing that sudden gales were tests of faith, moments when heaven and sea intertwined. Some ships carried relics or icons, hoping their sacred presence would soften the fury of waves. A calm after prayer was seen as proof of divine mercy, a reassurance that the storm had been heard and answered. Pause here and imagine a ship caught in such a storm. The sky is black. The rain lashes. The mast creaks as winds tear at its ropes. The sea rises, each wave towering higher, crashing against the deck in thunderous rhythm. Lightning splits the horizon, revealing for an instant the endless fury of water all around. The sailors shout prayers into the wind, their voices swallowed by the roar. And yet, amid the chaos, there is also a sense that the sea has become divine, alive with a presence too vast to understand. Storms in myth remind us that the sea was never a passive element. It was an active voice, a god who could bless or punish, soothe or destroy. To live beside it was to accept its moods, to honor its silence and endure its fury. And when the storm passed, when the sun broke through and the waves settled into rhythm again, survivors gave thanks, not only for life, but for the reminder that they were always small before the vast and sacred ocean. Long before satellites and compasses mapped the world, the ocean was a canvas of mystery. To medieval mapmakers, vast regions of sea remained unknown. Blank stretches that stirred both imagination and fear. Instead of leaving them empty, they filled those spaces with creatures, vast serpents, horned whales, fish with human faces, guardians of the unknown. These sea monsters on medieval maps were more than decoration. They were quiet warnings, reminders that beyond the familiar coasts lay danger, wonder, and the unknown depths of creation. Picture an old parchment map spread across a wooden table. Its ink is faded, its edges curled, but the seas shimmer with drawings. A dragon coils in the North Atlantic, its scales sharp and curling, its breath suggested by swirling lines. A whale rises beside a small ship, its back so large the sailors mistake it for an island. In another corner, a many-headed beast emerges from curling waves, each head snapping at unseen prey. To the eyes of those who studied the map, these were not mere fantasies. They were truths, or at least possibilities, woven into the silence of untraveled waters. The phrase "here be dragons" is often associated with such maps, though it appears less often than legend suggests. More common were Latin inscriptions, hic sunter cones or terra incognita, warnings that the sea ahead was uncharted, filled with peril. The monsters were not only terrors, they were markers of ignorance, symbols of how much remained hidden beneath the waves. For sailors, these maps reflected what they already believed: rumors of the kraken, of whales overturning ships, of serpents longer than masts reached harbors. With every voyage, to those at sea, strange shapes glimpsed in foam or shadows beneath the water became monsters in their minds. A school of dolphins might become a riding serpent. A breaching whale, its massive body towering above the waves, might become a beast large enough to swallow ships whole. The mapmaker's pen gave shape to these whispers, fixing them into memory. Yet there is also beauty in these depictions. The monsters are not only grotesque, they are richly detailed. Their scales patterned, their fins curling elegantly, they embodied both fear and fascination, reflecting the deep human need to fill silence with story. To leave the sea blank would have been unbearable. To fill it with monsters was to make it noble. Even if through myth. Pause here and imagine yourself as a sailor unrolling such a map before a voyage. Your finger traces the coastline of lands you know, then moves into the wide sea where drawings of beasts rise from ink and parchment. You feel both dread and excitement. Are these monsters real, waiting for you beyond the horizon? Or are they symbols of your own fear of the unknown? Either way, you know that when your ship sails into blank water, the silence will be filled with imagination. These medieval sea monsters remind us that the ocean's mystery was as powerful as its reality. They are echoes of human awe, the need to name, to warn, to wonder. Even today, when maps show every depth, we still sense something monstrous in the ocean's vastness, not literal beasts, perhaps, but the quiet fear of what we cannot see. In that way, the dragons of old maps still swim in the depths of our minds, guardians of forgotten oceans. Few figures of the sea have stirred as much imagination as the mermaid. Half human, half fish, she appears on distant shores, in sailors' songs, in carvings, in paintings, and in whispered stories told beneath the creak of ship timbers. Beautiful, yet dangerous, familiar yet strange, the mermaid embodies the mystery of the ocean itself, alluring, unpredictable, and forever beyond reach. In the Mediterranean, early images of mermaid-like beings appear in Greek myths. The sirens, once described as bird women, slowly became blended with visions of fish-tailed maidens whose songs lured sailors into danger. In these tales, the mermaid was not only beauty but temptation, a reminder of how the sea could charm as easily as it could destroy. In northern Europe, the Norse told of the marminal and marminal, sea people who could be caught in nets or seen combing their long hair upon rocks. They sometimes warned sailors of storms or guided them toward fish, but they could also vanish into the water, leaving only ripples and unanswered questions. Their dual nature reflected the seas they lived in, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel, always beyond full control. The Celtic Isles carried their own tales of mermaids, often blending with Selkie. The Merrow of Irish tradition wore a magical cap, the Cahuleen Druith, which allowed them to dive beneath the waves. Without it, they could not return to the sea like the Selkies. They often lived between worlds, falling in love with humans yet always longing for the tide's embrace. Their laughter was said to sound like music carried on the surf. Far across the world, in Japan, tales spoke of the Ningyo, a fish-like creature whose flesh granted long life but also brought misfortune. Unlike the graceful maidens of Europe, the Ningyo was often depicted with scales and fangs, strange and unsettling, a reminder that the sea's gifts always carried risk. To catch one was to invite storms or disaster, unless it was quickly returned to the depths. In the Pacific Islands, stories tell of maidens who dwelled beneath the waves, sometimes surfacing to guide or test voyagers. In West Africa, the goddess Mami Wata embodied both the beauty of the sea and its danger. She was shown as a mermaid with flowing hair and shining scales, offering wealth or love but demanding respect and devotion. Her image traveled across oceans with enslaved peoples, becoming part of Afro-Caribbean traditions where she still holds power in myth and ritual. Pause here and picture yourself at sea on a calm evening. The horizon glows with the last light of sunset, the water flat and shimmering. Then, at the edge of vision, a figure rises, long hair glistening, a tail flashing silver, just before slipping back beneath the waves. Was it real or only a trick of light? Sailors whispered to one another, their hearts caught between awe and fear. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the mermaid remains both promise and warning. The mermaid endures in myth because she embodies our own feelings toward the sea. She is beautiful, generous, and full of wonder, yet also unpredictable, untamable, and sometimes dangerous. To meet her is to glimpse the sea itself in human form, a being who lives between worlds, forever luring us to follow, yet forever beyond our grasp. For early peoples, the ocean was not simply water. It was a line, a shimmering edge that marked the boundary between the familiar world of villages, fields, and forests, and the vast unknown that stretched beyond. To live near the sea was to live at the edge of knowledge itself, where certainty ended and mystery began. The myths born from this sense of boundary reflect both wonder and fear, the sea as threshold, as veil, as the place where the known meets the unknowable. Imagine a coastal village centuries ago. Behind it lie hills, rivers, and fields where people understand the rhythm of planting and harvest. Ahead of it lies the horizon, where the sun sinks each night into the water and disappears. To those who watch, the ocean seems not endless but otherworldly, a doorway through which gods might pass, where souls might travel, where islands of myth might drift unseen. In Greek myth, the sea marked the edge of the known world. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules lay Oceanus, the great river that encircled the earth, flowing forever on its rim. To sail too far was to risk falling into the waters of chaos, leaving the ordered world behind. Maps of the time reflected this. Familiar coasts at the center, monstrous beings, and uncharted waters at the edges. For the Norse, the ocean's edge was guarded by Jörmungandr, the serpent that circled Midgard. To sail outward was to approach his massive coil, to touch the line between human lands and the wild unknown. The serpent's patience kept the world intact, but his breaking free would signal the end of all things. Thus, the horizon itself was myth, a boundary both protective and dangerous. In the Pacific Islands, the ocean was not only a boundary but also a bridge. Yet even there, the horizon was sacred. Navigators knew that islands appeared like stars scattered across the sea, but what lay beyond the farthest journey was uncertain. The boundary of the ocean was not empty, it was filled with spirits, ancestors, and realms unseen. Voyages into this liminal space required chance, offerings, and respect, for to cross it carelessly was to invite disaster. Medieval Europe also treated the sea as a line of mystery. Maps filled with monsters did not only warn of beasts but reminded sailors that the edges of knowledge were not safe. The ocean's horizon was a literal boundary between what could be charted and what remained hidden. Stories of Atlantis, of drowned lands, of paradisal isles all grew from the belief that the ocean marked not only space, but the boundary of human understanding. Pause here and picture yourself standing at the edge of such a shore. Behind you lies the familiar, the sound of animals, the smoke of hearths, the laughter of neighbors. Ahead of you stretches the unknown, endless water, shifting light. The horizon like a line drawn by unseen hands. You feel both longing and hesitation. To step beyond that line is to leave certainty behind, to enter a realm ruled by God's spirits and the quiet depth of myth. The ocean as boundary is one of the oldest truths of human imagination. It is the edge of maps, the edge of safety, the edge of life itself. To see it is to be reminded that we are always small before the vast, always poised between what we know and what lies beyond. And in that tension, myths are born, carried on. Waves like whispers that drift forever into the calm depths of forgotten oceans. The ocean, for all its vastness, has always carried the promise of land hidden within its waves. Sailors gazing toward the horizon imagine not only storms and monsters, but also sacred islands, places of refuge, mystery, and wonder. These were not ordinary lands. They were realms of gods, spirits, or ancestors, sometimes visible, sometimes drifting out of reach, sometimes lost forever beneath the water. To find one was to step beyond the ordinary world into the sacred. In Greek tales, there was the Isle of the Blessed, the Elysian fields set across the western sea, where heroes rested in eternal calm. For those who braved the waves, the horizon did not mark an end but a beginning, leading to a shore where life became endless spring, where soft breezes carried music, and no storms ever touched. The sea here was not a terror but a path to paradise. Celtic peoples told of Tirnanog, the land of youth lying far beyond the western waves. Those who reached it found eternal beauty, love, and joy living without sickness or death. Some stories tell of mortals who sailed there with fairy companions, only to return centuries later to a world that had aged without them. The sea became the veil of time itself, hiding places where eternity lingered, just out of reach. In the Pacific Islands, voyagers spoke of sacred islands guided by the stars, some more real, discovered through generations of careful navigation. Others were spirit islands visited in dreams or by shamans in trance. A glowing cloud might hint at one, the flight of birds might point to another. The ocean was filled with them, more numerous in imagination than in reality, each carrying the sense that the gods had scattered stepping stones across the waves for those who knew how to seek. Medieval legends across Europe and Asia spoke of phantom islands, lands that appeared on maps, whispered of by sailors, but could never be found again. St. Brendan's Isle was one such place, said to be glimpsed in the Atlantic, lush and green. A paradise visited by monks on their holy voyages. Others spoke of Antillia, High Brassel, or Avalon, places that glowed faintly on the horizon before dissolving into mist. Were they real? Or were they dreams, shaped by weary eyes staring to long across the waves? These sacred islands held a double meaning. They were havens, but also reminders of longing. They reflected the human desire for a place beyond hardship, a place of rest, beauty, or eternal life. Yet they also carried the sea's mystery, reminding sailors that paradise was never easy to reach, always requiring faith, courage, or a touch of divine favor. Pause here and imagine a sailor, dusk, standing at the prow of a ship. The sea glows with fading light, the horizon blurs into mist, and suddenly, just for a heartbeat, he sees land, a green hill, a golden shore, a shimmer of trees. His heart leaps. But when he blinks, the vision is gone, swallowed by waves. Was it real? Was it a promise? Or was it the sea itself, whispering of places just beyond the reach of time? The myths of sacred islands remind us that the ocean is not only danger and depth, it is also hope, the belief that somewhere, hidden in its vastness, lies a shore where life is gentler, where storms cannot reach, where the heart can rest. And though maps have grown full and satellites now sweep the seas, the longing for such forgotten shores lingers, carried in the quiet depths of imagination. If the ocean can hide sacred islands, it can also conceal cities. Beneath its shifting waves, people imagined entire civilizations swallowed by water, places once full of light, music, and power, now resting in silence at the bottom of the sea. These myths of drowned cities appear across the world, each telling of human pride, divine punishment, or the simple mystery of the ocean's depths. The most famous is Atlantis. First told by Plato in his dialogues, he described a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a mighty empire rich in knowledge and wealth. Its people, once noble, grew arrogant, and the gods, angered, sent earthquakes and floods. In a single day and night, the city vanished, swallowed by the sea. For centuries, sailors, dreamers, and explorers searched for it in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean, in distant oceans. To some, Atlantis is allegory, a tale of hubris. To others, it is memory, a whisper of a place lost in time. But Atlantis is not alone. In Celtic traditions, there is the story of Lyoness, a land said to lie between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, once fertile and green. It was drowned by the sea after a terrible storm. Only one man escaped, riding a white horse, ahead of the rising waves. Fishermen in later centuries claimed to hear church bells tolling beneath the water on calm nights, as if the city still lived in silence below. In Brittany, France, legends tell of Ys, a splendid city built below sea level, protected by great dikes. Its ruler's daughter, tempted by the devil or by vanity, opened the gates during a storm, and the ocean poured in, drowning the city forever. To this day, stories say that when the tide is low, the bells of Ys can still be heard, and sometimes the shimmering outlines of towers appear just beneath the waves. In India, The coast of Tamil Nadu carries tales of the lost city of Kumarikandam, a vast land said to have stretched into the Indian Ocean, home to poets and sages, destroyed by rising seas. And along the Japanese coast, stories tell of villages swallowed by sudden waves, their spirits living on beneath the ocean, watching the living from below. What unites these myths is their blend of sorrow and wonder. A drowned city is a reminder of fragility, how quickly greatness can be undone, how easily land can vanish. Yet it is also a story of endurance. Even when gone, these places remain alive in memory, their bells ringing, their lights glowing faintly, their voices carried in the hush of the sea. Pause here and imagine gazing into calm water on a windless evening. The surface gleams like glass, and for a moment you think you see shapes below, walls, towers, streets, all shimmering. Faintly, a sound drifts upward, perhaps the toll of a bell, perhaps only the waves. The vision fades, but the feeling lingers. Something is there, just out of reach, held forever in the ocean's embrace. The myths of drowned cities remind us that the sea is not only a giver but also a taker, and that its depths may hold stories we will never uncover. They speak of memory, of loss, of beauty hidden beneath silence. Whether real or not, these cities endure as echoes, reminders that beneath the calm depths of forgotten oceans, entire worlds may sleep. The sea never rests, even on calm days, when its surface shines like glass and not a ripple disturbs the horizon. The water is still moving, pulled by an invisible rhythm. The tides, rising and falling with the moon, have long been among the most mysterious of the ocean's voices. To coastal peoples, these movements were not mere mechanics. They were the breath of spirits, the heartbeat of the sea itself, cycles of life governed by gods, goddesses, and unseen powers. In many cultures, the tides were tied directly to the moon. Its slow climb across the night sky, its waxing and waning, were believed to draw the sea up and down as if by strings. In myth, the moon was often imagined as a lover of the sea, calling it closer with a silver touch, then letting it fall away. The gentle pull of water on sand became a dance between two celestial beings, an eternal rhythm written across both earth and sky. In Greek tradition, Selene, the moon goddess, was often linked to the tides. Some stories described her silver light as the cause of the sea's rising, her absence as its fall. Later, in Roman thought, Luna's connection to the ocean became part of natural philosophy. Yet behind the explanation lingered the myth of a goddess whose gaze moved water as easily as it moved hearts. The Celtic peoples, who lived along rugged coasts where tides shaped daily survival, spoke of spirits that ruled the waters. Some tales describe the tide as a vast breath of the sea god Manon and Maclear, whose cloak of mist hid and revealed land as easily as waves swallowed and uncovered the shore. In their vision, the tide was both danger and gift, bringing fish and seaweed for food, but also carrying boats away if disrespected. In Japan, the tide was linked to Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea. He was said to hold two jewels, one to call the tide in, one to send it out. With these treasures, he controlled the rhythm of water, and to earn his favor meant safety for fishermen and sailors. When the sea pulled back suddenly, it was his jewel at work. When it surged forward, it was his will. The Pacific Islands, too, carried chants about the tide as the work of gods. Polynesian navigators saw in the moon's phases not only light for their journeys but also messages about the movement of water guiding their fishing and their sailing. The tide was a living voice, not a silent mechanism, and each change was part of a great conversation between sky, sea, and people. Pause here and picture a quiet shoreline at night. The moon is full, its light shimmering across the water like a silver path. Slowly, silently, the tide creeps upward, covering rocks, touching grass, wrapping the land in its embrace. Hours later it retreats, revealing sand and shells glistening in the dawn. Each rise and fall feels like the sea breathing, as if the ocean itself sleeps, and wakes in rhythm with the moon. The myths of tides remind us that people have always seen movement as meaning. In the endless rise and fall of the ocean, they found stories of gods and spirits, of lovers and guardians, of cycles that bound human life to cosmic order. Even today, when we understand the pull of gravity, the rhythm feels ancient. Timeless, the same gentle pulse that shaped myths, whispered prayers, and filled the calm depths of forgotten oceans. For all its mystery and power, the sea was never approached casually. To those who lived beside it, every voyage, every cast of the net, every step into the surf was a moment of risk, and risk demanded reverence. Across cultures, the ocean was honored with rituals and offerings, gestures of respect meant to calm its temper and invite its generosity. The sea was not simply water. It was a living presence, and like any great being, it listened. In ancient Greece, sailors poured libations of wine before setting out, letting the liquid mingle with salt water as a gift to Poseidon. Fishermen sometimes tossed small offerings, food, flowers, or coins, into the sea before casting their nets. The ritual was quiet, not dramatic, a simple acknowledgement that the ocean's bounty was never theirs by right but granted by favor. In Japan, coastal villages held ceremonies for Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea. Offerings of rice, sake, or even finely crafted treasures were set adrift upon the waves, carried to his palace beneath the waters. Shrines to sea deities still stand on rocky cliffs and small islands, their torii gates watching over harbors. Before storms or fishing seasons, priests led prayers to ensure safety and abundance, the sound of drums and chants blending with the crash of waves. The Norse left coins, weapons, and even animals as offerings to Aegir and Ran, gods of the sea. Some ships were buried or burned in their entirety, given back to the waters so that their spirits would sail on. The drowning of sailors was sometimes seen as Ran gathering souls with her net. A harsh offering she demanded, but one that gave her hull beneath the waves its eternal company. In the Pacific Islands, offerings to Tangaroa often involved chants and dances performed at the shore. Fishermen might set aside the first catch, returning it to the water as thanks. Navigators, before long voyages, stood barefoot on the sand facing the horizon, their voices rising in prayer, their words carried by the wind. For them, ritual was not separate from daily life. It was woven into every act upon the sea. Even in Christian traditions, sailors prayed before departure, their ships blessed with holy water or icons placed near the bow. Some carried relics of saints believed to calm storms. The practice was less about appeasing a sea god and more about asking heaven to guide them across an unpredictable world of waves. Yet the impulse was the same, to seek favor, to show reverence, to admit that no human strength alone could master the sea. Pause here and imagine a quiet dawn at the shore. Fishermen gather in silence, their nets coiled at their feet, their boats rocking gently in the tide. One by one, they step to the water's edge, pouring a small libation, scattering a handful of grain, or whispering words only the sea will hear. The waves take each gift, pulling it softly into their depths. When the boats finally push off, the air feels lighter, as though the sea has nodded in acceptance, its silence carrying blessing. The rituals and offerings remind us that human survival has always depended on humility. The sea was never conquered, it was honored. Each coin tossed, each sip poured, each prayer whispered was less about controlling the ocean and more about acknowledging its vastness. To live beside the sea was to live in relationship, one of respect, gratitude, and quiet conversation with the calm depths of forgotten oceans. Life at sea was long, difficult, and filled with silence. The horizon stretched endlessly. The waves repeated their rhythm without end, and days blurred together into the steady creak of wood and the snap of sails. In that silence, sailors turned to song, sometimes loud and rhythmic, to keep their hands working in unison. sometimes soft and prayerful, whispered into the night. These songs, known in later centuries as shanties, were not only tools of labor, but also fragments of myth, memory, and hope drifting with the wind across the waters. Imagine the deck of a wooden ship at dawn. The crew gathers at the ropes, their breath steaming in the chill air. A single voice begins, slow and steady, singing of a faraway shore or a loved one left behind. The others join, their voices blending into rhythm. With each pull of the rope, with each heave of the sail, the song carries them forward, transforming toil into something almost sacred. The sea listens, the waves keeping time. In many traditions, these songs were prayers as much as melodies. A verse might call upon the sea gods for mercy, another might honor saints who protected sailors, another might simply describe the beauty of calm waters after a storm. Even the hum of a simple tune was a way of keeping fear at bay, of reminding oneself that the ocean's vast silence could be filled with human voice. In ancient Greece, chants to Poseidon were sung before voyages, while hymns to the Nereids or to Aphrodite were offered when seas turned gentle. In Norse longships, rhythmic songs matched the stroke of oars, echoing against fjord walls like prayers carried into the cold air. Polynesian voyagers filled the Pacific with chants to Tangaroa and to ancestors, their voices rising with the stars that guided their way. And in later centuries, European sailors created work songs that spoke of storms, of longing, of monsters glimpsed in foam. But beyond the songs of labor were the songs of solitude, quiet prayers sung into the darkness. When a sailor stood watch alone, a man at the helm might murmur a verse to calm his nerves, the words drifting no louder than the waves. Another might sing softly of home, the memory of voices on land carried across the water. In these private moments, the song was not for the crew, not even for the gods. It was for the sea itself, a way of saying, I am here, I am small, please let me pass. Pause here and picture such a night. The stars blaze above, the sea is dark and calm, and a lone sailor leans on the railing, his voice barely rising above the hush of water. The melody is simple, repeating like the tide. His words are carried away, mingling with wind, becoming part of the ocean's endless song. In that moment, fear is softened, loneliness eased, and the vastness of the sea feels just a little less empty. The songs of sailors remind us that myth does not only live in grand temples or ancient texts, it also lives in human voices, in the fragile melodies carried into silence. Shanties and prayers were the myth of ordinary people, sung not to be recorded but to survive the long hours of sea, to honor the forces that shaped their fate, and to fill the calm depths of forgotten oceans with echoes of their lives. The ocean is not only a place of ships and storms, of nets and harbors, it also lives in the mind, drifting into sleep as dream and vision for countless cultures. The sea became a mirror of the unconscious, vast, mysterious, full of hidden creatures and unseen depths. To dream of the ocean was to dream of the unknown, to receive messages from God's ancestors, or the spirit world. In myths and traditions, the sea in dreams was never random, it was a prophecy, a whisper from beyond. In ancient Greece, dreams of the sea were often taken seriously. A calm sea seen in sleep was a promise of safety, success in voyages, or peace in the household, but a stormy sea foretold strife, danger, or death. Oracles and priests listened carefully to such dreams, interpreting them as messages from Poseidon or from the depths of Oceanus himself. In Homeric epics, the sea frequently appeared as both obstacle and guide, shaping the fate of heroes even when they closed their eyes. In the Bible, dreams of water carried heavy symbolism. The sea was chaos, a force that only divine power could calm. To dream of it was to sense something greater at work, a coming trial, a divine test, or a cleansing. Prophets often described visions of rivers and seas overflowing, metaphors of change, endings, and beginnings. The ocean, in this sense, was both danger and renewal, prophecy and warning for the Norse. Dreams of the ocean were bound to fate itself. A seer might dream of Jormungandr, the world serpent stirring in the depths, a sign of coming doom. Sailors who dreamt of Ran's net feared drowning, while those who saw shining hulls beneath the waves believed they were being called toward another world. Dreams of longships crossing calm waters could be seen as visions of ancestors, guiding their descendants forward. In Polynesian traditions, dreams were deeply tied to navigation. A voyager might dream of a bird circling above water, a cloud glowing on the horizon, or a star shifting in the sky. These were not seen as mere imagination but as guidance, ancestors whispering the path to new islands, enchants, and stories. Such dreams were remembered and honored, shaping decisions for real journeys upon the sea. Even in more recent times, sailors spoke of prophetic dreams. Some told of ships sinking in their sleep, only to awaken with dread and find storms waiting on the horizon. Others dreamed of loved ones waving from distant shores, their faces guiding sailors home after months away. The ocean of dreams was never silent. It carried voices, warnings, and comforts across the thin veil between waking and sleeping. Pause here and picture yourself drifting to sleep on the deck of a ship. The stars glow above, the sea hums softly below, and your mind begins to wander. In your dream, the water opens like a mirror, showing visions, perhaps of a storm, perhaps of an island, perhaps of faces you have missed. When you wake, the dream lingers, as though the sea itself has spoken to you in the language of images. The myths of ocean dreams remind us that water has always been more than substance. It is memory, prophecy, a realm where the unconscious and the divine touch. To dream of the sea is to dream of depth itself, to glimpse truths too vast for waking life, and in those dreams, as in myths, the calm depths of forgotten oceans continue to whisper. Though centuries have passed and maps now chart even the deepest trenches, the old myths of the sea have not vanished. They linger quiet but persistent, in our songs, in our stories, in our art. Even in a world of satellites and engines, the ocean remains a mystery too vast, fully tame, and so its myths continue to echo, reshaped but enduring. Mermaids, once feared as omens or lures, now swim through literature and film. Sometimes gentle, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes playful. Children grow up hearing of them in fairy tales, their shimmering tales gliding through picture books and screens. Yet beneath the softness of these tales lies the old truth. The sea is beautiful but never wholly safe, alluring yet unpredictable. The kraken, once a terror whispered by sailors in the North Atlantic, now surfaces in novels, video games, and films as a symbol of the deep's enormity. Its shadow continues to haunt imagination, a reminder that the ocean may still hide creatures of immense size. In the curve of a squid's tentacle or the breach of a whale, we glimpse the myth reborn, softened by science yet never erased. The drowned cities, Atlantis, Lioness, Ease, still inspire explorers, dreamers, and storytellers. Documentaries search the seabed for their ruins, novelists build worlds upon their legends, and spiritual seekers find in them metaphors of human pride, loss, and the eternal pull of the sea. Even if their stones never rise from the depths, their stories live, filling the silence of the unknown with meaning, and the rituals, too, continue. In fishing villages from Japan to the Pacific, offerings are still given to the waves, small cups of sake poured into the surf, chants whispered at dawn. Flowers cast onto water, memorials for those lost at sea. Modern faiths may call them blessings or remembrances, but their roots stretch back to the same reverence that fishermen and sailors once felt, the knowledge that the sea is never merely water. Pause here and imagine standing on a modern pier at dusk. Lights glow along the shore, ships hum with engines, but beyond them the horizon is still vast and dark. A child leans over the railing, listening to a parent tell of mermaids, A group of divers prepare to explore beneath the waves, their excitement tinged with nervous laughter. An old fisherman pours a libation into the sea, his gesture small but ancient. The ocean listens, as it always has, its silence filled with memory. The echoes of sea myths today remind us that stories do not fade easily. They shift, they change, they adapt, from whispered warnings to bedtime tales, from sacred rituals to popular culture, yet their essence endures. The ocean as mystery, as presence, as something greater than ourselves. Even in the age of science, we still feel awe standing before its waves. And in that awe, the myths return, carried quietly in the calm depths of forgotten oceans. Today, we know more about the sea than ever before. Submarines dive into trenches, satellites trace the shapes of currents, and scientists study the lives of creatures once thought to be legends. And yet, even with all this knowledge, the ocean still feels like a place where story and science meet, where myth has not disappeared but grown quieter, resting beneath the surface of explanation. Consider the giant squid. For centuries, it was a monster of rumor, a kraken whose tentacles pulled ships into darkness. Sailors swore they had seen arms as thick as masts, suckers the size of shields. For a long time, scholars dismissed these tales. And then, in the modern age, the giant squid was photographed alive in the deep, its long arms drifting gracefully through the dark. The myth was not false, only waiting for science to glimpse it. The same is true of the whale, once mistaken for an island, once imagined as a beast that swallowed prophets whole. Science has shown its reality, a calm giant, breathing slowly, singing songs that travel for miles beneath the waves. Yet when we see one breach, when its vast body arcs above the water, it still feels like myth, like something too great to be explained only by biology. Science also explains the tides, the pull of the moon, the rise and fall of currents. But even knowing this, to stand at a shoreline at night, watching the silver path stretch across the sea still feels sacred. We may call it gravity, but in our hearts it remains a dance. The same dance ancient peoples once ascribed to gods and jewels, to spirits breathing through the waves. Even the maps of the ocean remain incomplete. Vast stretches of seabed are still unmapped. Trenches deeper than Everest is tall still hold secrets. Strange lights, unfamiliar sounds, creatures rising from the dark. These continue to spark the same awe that filled the myths of drowned cities and sacred islands. Science can name them, but wonder remains. Pause here and picture yourself in a modern research vessel at night. Instruments hum, screens glow with data, but outside, the deck is silent. You look out over the endless horizon, black water stretching in every direction. The stars blaze above, the waves whisper below. You know what the charts say: salinity, current, depth. Yet none of it captures the silence, the vastness, the sense that something greater waits beneath. In that moment, you realize that story and science are not opposites. They are companions, two ways of listening to the same ocean. The living ocean today reminds us that knowledge does not erase myth. Instead, it deepens it. To name the giant squid does not make it less wondrous. To measure the tides does not make them less sacred. The ocean remains what it has always been: giver of life, keeper of silence, mirror of imagination. Between science and story, it still speaks, quietly, carrying its myths into the present like driftwood upon the tide.